Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by on a miserable, rainy Sunday morning. Still quite early in the day. I'm nicking an idea off of Danny. Well, I don't know whether she still does it or not, but she started the idea of a Chatty Sunday. You know, just a video chatting about stuff, orchid related and things, and some controversial subjects put up for discussion in the comment section, that sort of thing. I mean, we all take part in the comments and stuff like that. So that's a bit about what this is. First things first, it's definitely a twinkle. Yay! Flipping laughs. I've been waiting a long time to ID that plant. And it's definitely a twinkle. These are not miniature Oncidium blooms. Well, they are, but it is the yellow twinkle, finally, proven. And the sad bit is this spike's going over. That's a shame, but nonetheless, now there's a controversial subject straight away. To cut the spike or not? Well, I think it's reasonably established nowadays that orchids in the main are capable of reabsorbing nutrients that it's pushed out into that spike. So by leaving it there and letting it die back, you're allowing some of those nutrients to be reabsorbed into the plant. That doesn't mean to say you have to leave your spikes on. I don't always leave them on. In fact, in the main, I take them off because they make the plant look untidy. And if you could imagine all the spikes I've had in here, if all those dead spikes were still sticking up on all these plants, it would be quite untidy. But it's an aesthetic thing, really. If you don't like the old dying spikes, then cut them off. The amount of nutrients that are reabsorbed, you should be replacing with your feeding regime anyway, if you see what I mean. But the natural way is to let them die back. That's your choice. I don't say one way or the other. In the main, mine come off. And recently I've taken some spikes off before they've even grown, because I don't want the plant putting the nutrients into the spike. I want the plant to keep it and put up new growths. So choices. I fixed it, I think. Do you know, I took that thing apart yesterday and I just looked at it, scratching my head for so long, trying to work out how the hell it actually works, because it wasn't obvious. I mean, obviously it's back together again now, so I can't show you what I'm getting at. But the basic principle is that a voltage comes in and it's stepped up to quite a high voltage, quite honestly, but obviously there's no current there, so it's not like a dangerous voltage. You know, there's no current in with it. It's just very high volts. And you've got the plates in the centre, which have got like, it's no, I'm not going to show it. Basically, there is a type of metal that forms a plate in the centre, and then very close to those plates were 4 wires. And on inspection, those wires are not joined. They were just suspended. So they had no connection. They had nowhere for the current to go. And I thought, well, how the hell does this work? And it suddenly dawned on me that where in nature can electrical current flow, yeah, when there's no obvious path? Well, it's in the storms, isn't it? When the lightning strikes, yeah? When that charge manages to find a path. Now, that's a bit dramatic. We certainly don't want lightning going on inside here. But an assumption, but the only way I can see this actually works is that there is, it doesn't matter which way round, whether it's negative or positive, the flow's going to happen. But a current is put onto the plate in the centre, and then the opposite current is pushed up those wires. And because of the very high voltage, the current is transferring across through the air, and that's how the ions are formed. And it took me a while, so then I thought, well, if that's how it works, does it need all 4 wires? Because one of them was broken, and there was no way I could reattach it. Basically, the little hook that suspended that wire in place was broken off, so the wire was shorter than it needed to be, so I couldn't replace it, so I just cut it off at the base. So that wire is now no longer there, but the other three are. And when this thing's working, you can smell it. It's if you've ever been near a photocopier or something along that, or a printer that's working hard, that's basically like an ozone sort of smell. And when this thing's working, it gives off that very, very faint odour. So I put it all back together and turned it on and stood well back. Yeah, me and electrics are not the best of friends. And it fired up, and I left it for 5 or 10 minutes. Was very, very cautious to make sure nothing was overheating, because obviously the same amount of power was coming in there. Instead of it being distributed along 4 wires, it only had 3. So in theory, you know, there's a third as much energy going up the 3 wires that were left, and that might have been overcooking it a bit. But nothing got hot. You know, there was no strange noises or excess temperatures or anything, so I thought, well, we'll give it a go, and it is working. So it's it's been mended by breaking it, if you see what I mean, by taking that wire out completely. The other 3 are working fine. So I've got a new one coming, and given that I know what that does to my air in here, especially in the winter, this air gets stale in the winter. It's not getting replenished by fresh air in through the external vents, if you see what I mean. And this thing just keeps it clean. You know, it just stops those pathogens and stuff building up. And even though I can't prove it, I know it's working. You know, it's the scientific principle says that it's doing its job. So having 2 of them running might not be a big deal. But, as I said, they're not designed for high humidity, which is why that wire rusted off, you know, so they will always have a limited life in an environment like this compared with, say, in your home. But, you know, there's a lot of people use these like in bedrooms and things like that, where somebody may have asthma or other sort of breathing related issues, where clean air is really important, and they do their job, you know. So, yeah, good stuff. And quite honestly, there's an awful lot of hospitals have got these types of units built into their air conditioning systems to keep the air clean in the hospital. Well, that says to me that it's doing its job, you know. So that's that subject done. The other subject I want to pick up on, very controversial, nutrients and stuff, and feeding orchids and things like that. And I'd recommend you go and have a listen to Rick's latest video. He has a way of explaining stuff that seems to simplify it, whereas when I try and explain it, everybody gets a headache, including me. It's a very, very complex subject, but I'm going to put a link in my description to a document that's come from the Michigan State University. A lot of good stuff comes out of there, including my MSU fertilizer, which I'm over the moon with. And yeah, for me, it alleviates the need to worry as much about nutrients, because it's got everything my plants need in it, and mix that with the RO water, which has got nothing in it, means the plants are getting what they're supposed to have. But the subject really is calcium and magnesium. Well, in Rick's case specifically calcium, but if you go and have a look at Bumblebee's latest video as well, she diagnosed that some of her plants had magnesium deficiencies. Well, again, you can only know what you're giving your plants and whether there's any of that in there, and if there isn't, it's a pretty good conclusion that they're going to be a bit short. You know, it's geared up to what you put in, you know. But Rick's idea is that calcium being non-mobile, obviously it comes in through the roots in a suitable form, and it goes up through the plant, and the plant says, oh, you need some, you can have a bit, you need some, you can have a bit, you can have a bit, oh dear, I've run out. So this bit over here that could do with some calcium, there ain't enough left. So it's a shortfall. You can see the logic of that. And the only way it's going to get some more is for you to put some more in. You know, doesn't make it. So, you know, it's a constant trickle feed of calcium required. I don't believe it needs magic huge doses of any of these things. If you go back far enough, historically, when people thought they knew everything, when they obviously didn't, and they'll still tell you that, you know, they won't change their ways. But calcium and magnesium were always thought of as micro elements, right down in the lists with the iron and the boron and the zinc and the stuff like that. So they were only ever there in minute quantities. The understanding really wasn't there. I don't care what anybody says. The knowledge was as known at that time. The knowledge base has increased dramatically, you know, with the aid of places like Michigan State University putting the hard work in for us and finding out about all these elements and how they work. So have a look at the link and have a look at the chart, because in my book it's the simplest way of explaining it all that I've ever come across. It's done in chart form, tells you which elements are mobile and which elements aren't. It tells you what those elements do for the plant, but for me, more importantly, it tells the relationship between those elements, because they don't work in isolation. Some of them can only work if another one is present. So they go together, and that starts getting complicated. And at that point I stop. All I need to know is what they need, a rough idea of what they do with it and why, and then just provide it. That's my bit. My bit is giving it to them so that the plants can use it. But it's a nice chart, quite simple for a subject that's never going to be simple, quite honestly. It's a complex subject, and always provides some controversy over opinions and different viewpoints and stuff like that. But for somebody like me who's starting with a base of RO water which has got virtually nothing in it, it's obvious to me that unless I give my plants all of those elements, the plant's not going to get them. You know, there may be a little bit coming out of decomposition in the media, but I'd rather that wasn't there, quite honestly. I'm not switching to water culture, don't start. I like my bark medium and my mix with moss. I like it, and it works for me in my environment, so I'm not changing it. But yeah, have a look at the chart. It's an interesting little read without it becoming too technical. But the relationship between those elements is quite important. But back to Rick. First of all, we all wish him well. Those of you who follow his channel, you know what's going on. You know the stuff he's got to go through to try and get himself up and running again. So we all wish him well, and come out the other end and come and chat to us again. But his idea is the fact that this, certainly in the case of calcium, is the amount that goes in there gets put into the plant in the places it's needed until it's all gone. And then if you don't add some more in, it's going to be a shortfall. So his idea is a trickle feed. Incredibly low levels, but just always there. Always adding a little bit in so that as the plant progresses, you know, as it grows, as it tries to build more structures, it's got the building block, which is fundamentally calcium. It's the building blocks. It's what makes the plant's ability to build those structures: roots, stems, canes, pseudobulbs, leaves. Yeah, without those building blocks, they're not going to work properly, and you're going to get reduced growth or weaker growth. You know, and a severe calcium deficiency, you'll lose your new growth. They'll just rot off and turn black. We've seen that in enough cases to not worry about trying to prove it. It's pretty obvious. But yeah, so this time of year my plants are not actively, what I would call actively growing. They're ticking over, so they don't need a lot of anything. So I'm feeding at very low levels. Before you ask, what I call a very low level, that's for my sensitive roots things, Masdevallias, Restrepias, Miltoniopsis. They get a low level feed. They're getting a TDS level of about 80 to 100. and they only get it once every 3 waterings, so they're getting next to nothing, but then they're not growing much, and they don't need much. Some plants are not big strappy things. I mean, if you look at some of these dendrobiums up here, look at the energy that plant must have used to produce those 2 huge canes in one season. That's real progressive growth. Well, if you don't pump the stuff in at the bottom, those growths won't be as big. They won't be as strappy. They won't be as healthy. Yeah? And it all contributes to the total energy of the plant. So big strappy growth. Same with cattleyas, big strappy growths. You're only going to get that if you pump it in at the bottom, you know. So Rick's idea is to give a trickle feed of calcium. In my case, if I do this, the magnesium's going to have to go in as well, because I've got CalMag, and I'm not starting to separate stuff out. I'm happy that CalMag does its job. It's chelated. It doesn't need faffing around with pH or anything like that. It'll get in there, you know. So during this time of year, I'm flushing twice and feeding once at low levels. Well, how about one of those flushes turns into a CalMag at a low level? And just top that little bit up instead of only hydration, because that's all RO water would ever be. And that doesn't sound like a daft idea. And I can give it a go, and I know at the levels I'm going to use probably about 50 parts per million of calcium and magnesium on its own. I'm not mixing it. I don't know enough or have enough confidence to start mixing that in with the MSU fertiliser. And quite honestly, I shouldn't need to. The MSU fertiliser's already got the calcium and magnesium in it, which is why I use it. So yeah, a little trickle feed. And then gradually, as the growing season comes on, I will change the way I feed my plants. They will start getting back into more active growth, slowly but surely, as we head out into March. And the day lengths come back, the daytime temperatures come back, and everything starts kicking off. Well, to allow it to kick off and progress as early in the season as possible, I need to increase what goes in goes in at the bottom of the plant. So instead of flushing twice and feeding once, I'll flush once and feed once. So that drops out a flush. Yeah? And then as things start progressing even more, I'll switch to 2 feeds and 1 flush. And then when we get into the height of the season, it'll be 3 feeds and 1 flush. Well, when I get to that level, how much better might it be, unproven, if instead of 3 feeds, I do 2 feeds and 1 CalMag? Yeah? Because at that time of year, when all those new growths are pushing on like that, the plant's going to need more calcium. And vigorous plants might need more than my MSU fertiliser can provide on its own. Now that's a guess, that's not knowledge, because I haven't done it yet. But that's my idea, is to just change my feeding regime a little bit. I don't do anything dramatic. Everything's gradual, gently, little bit at a time, that sort of stuff. So yeah, have a look at Bumblebee's logic. You know, she's looked back a year or so ago to what she thought were her problems, what she's done to resolve them, and the latest video shows the results. Because it's not something that happens overnight, you know. It just doesn't. It takes time for your plants to adjust to the changes and make use of those changes. So it takes a while before you see the results. But yeah, so some little changes there. Oh, there was something else out here I want to show you. It's gone. More coffee. Oh, if I come across it later, I'll think about filming. I won't be doing much out here today. I've got those shelves to water. That's all that was left from yesterday. And the holy clay pots are due today, so I'll be getting those down and watering them. And the holy clay pots have all got, well, all bar 1 or 2, have all got something going on. They've all got buds forming in sheaths, or in some cases buds bursting out the top of sheaths. So there's all stuff going on, but it doesn't really warrant a holy clay pot update yet. I'd like to give it another week or so. I mean, if you look at the I can't see what I'm pointing at. I mean, if you look there, that sheath, the buds are bursting out the top of there, you know, and there's another sheath doing the same thing, the other side of the plant. But that's buried in the undergrowth up there. So there's quite a lot going on the Cattleya front, you know, there's quite a lot of buds coming, so things are progressing. And even these two rescue Cattleyas are still progressing. It's slow progress, and it always will be for probably the whole of the next season. But we've got a nice growth there, got a nice growth here. They've both done some roots, you know, so at least they're recovering now. So yeah, a Chatty. Oh, that's just opened. I'm not going to be able to film that very well. That's my it's a Dendrobium phalaenopsis type, and it's called Thai Angel. And that's been a long time out of bloom, that one. My Dendrobium phalaenopsis just do not do very well for me. I've never put my finger on it why. Some of it goes back over quite a long period of time, several years, where they got left in their pot too long. You know, the media broke down, root loss, repotted probably at a bad time when no new roots were coming out, and set the plant back probably a year or more. I did, you know, lack of knowledge and all that sort of stuff. But none of them are doing great, but they're doing better. I mean, this one's got some nice new growths coming on it now. This one's got a nice strong new growth, and another not so strong one. I doubt if that's going to get any bigger now, but at least it's there with some new leaves. This one's got some new growths. It's trying to put a spike up, which is blasted. It's too cold out here for these, really. So I can't expect them to do well through the winter. All I can expect them to do is survive. But this next growing season, I'm hoping to push those on and get some really good strong canes coming up on those and put some strength back into them. And then maybe next time they'll flower better. We shall see. Sorry, in my mind, my tiny little mind that isn't working properly yet because I haven't had enough coffee, there's something else I wanted to show you, and I've just lost it. It's gone. Oh, it may come back to me. Anyway, just a bit of a stealing Danny's idea. It's not going to be a regular update, or it's not going to be anything that I'm going to do every Sunday. It's just something I thought about doing, was a chatty one. And have a look at that link if you're interested in you know, the nutrients that you put into your orchids and the effect they have on the plants and their interrelationships, because they're not standalone, most of them. They work as partners. They work together, sometimes 3 or 4 working together for a common goal that then needs another nutrient to be there for it to work. It's a very complex subject, but at least the knowledge is around nowadays. That's the difference. If you go back 30-40 years, that information was not there. It was just very basic, and nobody bothered putting the effort in to actually do the work to find these things out. So personal thank you to Michigan State University for doing the work for us. You know, now all we need to do is just read it and understand it. And if it's too much, then don't worry about it. Just make sure that the fertiliser you use is nicely balanced and's got all those bits in it to one degree or another. I'm going to put a warning shot out. I shouldn't do this, really. It's naughty. But I can cloud the issue enough that I can't get clobbered by YouTube. The MSU fertiliser is based in the States. Getting it in the EU is practically impossible. I wish somebody would take that up. You know, there's a lot of orchid growers, some of the big nurseries and everything, you know, that stuff could do with being more readily available, but it isn't. But there is something that's very close that is designed to go with RO water. And I tried it. And at first it seemed very good stuff, but if you look at the analysis of the MSU fertiliser and then you have a look at the analysis of this other one I'm on about, you will see a big difference on one single element, and that element is sulphur. Now, we know plants need some, yes, but just step back and think, what is sulphur? Where does it occur naturally? what does it do? And that particular fertiliser has got over 4 times the amount that I have ever seen in any other fertiliser. Ever. And I still can't justify that, I'm afraid. I don't see why somebody thinks that 4 times the amount of that is actually okay. And there were consequences. It's a good fertiliser, don't get me wrong. And if you grow in pots and things like that, it's probably fine. Although I would recommend not dosing it up to the level they say, because that sounds a bit high to me. But nonetheless, it's good stuff. But where it falls down is where you've got bare roots that dry fast, and it burns them. And that's not just me. That's experienced by quite a few well-known YouTube growers with large collections, and we all had the same problem with it. So it wasn't just me. I'm not saying it was just me. I'm saying it was readily accepted that under those circumstances it don't do your roots much good, and that was at much lower doses than recommended. So if you're going to use that stuff, take care. Warning shot, without any names being mentioned. It's just that subject came up on somebody else's video. Somebody was thinking of using it, and I can't just sit there and let that go. I've got to put that warning shot out because I experienced it, and so did quite a few others. So you know, we didn't get anywhere with the manufacturer. It was a case of bog off, you don't know what you're talking about. Well, that may be true. I don't know. Anyway, we didn't get anywhere with it. Yep, I'll leave it at that for now. That's about as good as I can get on the Cymbidium today. Appalling light. Still not fully open, but I am aware that some Cymbidiums stay like that, and that is it. They do have this cupped shape. So I may have one of those that doesn't open up flatter than that. We shall have to wait and see, give it time. It's only just opening. And they do apparently last quite a long time, but as that's my first hybrid Cymbidium, I don't know, do I? It's the first one I've ever had. I did have a species Cymbidium a few years back, but it was just too big. It was just too big. And it was actually a warm grower, as opposed to most of them are cool growers. And as a consequence, it took up far, far too much space. So I actually sold that. Lovely blooms on it. I can't even remember what the hell it was called now. But it was a species anyway. And it was a warm grower, so it would have had to live in here, and it just took up too much space. This one, I don't mind the space it takes up this time of year, because I've got so many plants in the house, so I can accommodate it. But as soon as the weather's suitable, you're going out in the garden again, mate. That's where it lived last year, out in the garden. Got rained on, got morning sun. I fed it when I remembered, and chucked some feed in while I was doing my bonsai trees, as I said, when I remembered. And it just got left out there. And it grew a nice big fat new bulb, 3 times the size of the older bulbs. It's only got 2 old bulbs. And 1 big fat new one with 2 spikes. I'm happy with that. So as soon as the opportunity arises, you're going straight back in the garden, mate. And hopefully this season, maybe we'll get 2 new growths. Yeah? So we may get more than 2 spikes at the end of next year into the following year. We shall see. But they're not my favourite plants because of the physical amount of space they take up. There are some lovely miniatures around. But again, they're not my favourites. And I haven't got huge amounts of spare room. So that spare room is precious to me, and it's only going to get used this year with things that are special for me, things that I've been wanting a long time, or things that I come across that just sound really good, and that's what that space will get used up for. As a, you know, in addition to the plants I've already got getting bigger. You know, the bigger they get, the more squashed up they are. The more squashed up they are, the less the light penetrates, the less the air circulation works for them. You know, so they need some space around them. They need that air circulating. It's important. So, okay, I'll leave it at that for today. It's all right. There's still something on my mind that I wanted to show you, but it's gone, so it may have to wait till tomorrow. Anyway, breakfast, more coffee, and then crack on with this watering. It's funny how you don't feel like, on a day like this, I don't feel like doing anything out here. And yet when the sun's out and it's all bright and cheery in here, I could spend all day out here. I don't, but I could. Anyway, see you next time. Thanks for dropping by.